Sarah Martinez had never imagined that her quiet life as a supply clerk would lead her to the most dangerous ridge in Afghanistan. The morning sun cast long shadows across forward operating base Blackwater as she adjusted her gear one final time. Her hands trembled slightly as she checked her rifle, a standard M4 carbine that she had qualified with but rarely used outside of mandatory training sessions. The convoy assignment had come as a surprise. Captain Williams had approached her desk in the supply depot just 3 days earlier, his expression serious as he handed her the deployment orders. Sarah's role was supposed to be simple: accompany the supply convoy to Ridge Point Alpha, help establish a temporary supply cache, and provide administrative support while the combat engineers worked on fortifying the position. It was meant to be a routine logistics operation, the kind of unglamorous but essential work that kept the war machine running. Sarah's background was far from military royalty. She had grown up in a small farming town in Nebraska, where her father taught her to hunt rabbits and deer in the vast cornfields that stretched beyond their modest home. Her shooting skills had developed out of necessity rather than sport. When the family needed meat on the table, Sarah's steady hand and patient eye often made the difference between a good meal and another night of canned beans. The military had been her escape route from a dead-end life in her hometown. After high school, with college expenses beyond her family's reach and few job prospects in rural Nebraska, the Army's promise of training, education benefits, and steady pay had seemed like a golden opportunity. She had excelled in basic training, particularly during weapons qualification, but her quiet demeanor and preference for working behind the scenes had naturally led her toward logistics and supply roles. The other members of the convoy treated her with the polite indifference typically reserved for support personnel. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, the convoy commander, had briefed the team on their mission parameters. The ridge was strategically important, overlooking a crucial supply route that insurgents had been harassing for weeks. Intelligence suggested minimal enemy presence in the immediate area, but recent attacks on other supply lines had everyone on edge. Private First Class Johnson, a combat engineer from Detroit, had tried to lighten the mood during their pre-deployment briefing. His jokes about Sarah being their secret weapon in case they ran out of MREs fell flat, but his intentions were good. The rest of the team consisted of Specialist Davis, a communications expert from Texas, and Corporal Thompson, a medic whose steady nerves had already saved lives during his previous deployments. The convoy's journey to Ridge Point Alpha took nearly 6 hours, winding through mountain passes and valleys that showcased Afghanistan's rugged beauty alongside its hidden dangers. Sarah found herself constantly scanning the terrain, her hunting instincts automatically cataloging potential hiding spots and lines of sight. The landscape reminded her of hunting trips with her father, though the stakes here were infinitely higher. As they approached the ridge, Sarah noticed how the terrain changed. The rocky outcroppings provided excellent cover, but also created numerous blind spots. The position they were meant to establish overlooked a valley where supply convoys would need to pass, making it strategically valuable, but also a potential target for enemy snipers who might want to disrupt American operations. The team began setting up their temporary base just after noon. Sarah's job was to inventory supplies and establish communication protocols with the main base, but she found herself drawn to the ridge's edge, studying the valley below through her binoculars. Her father's voice echoed in her memory, teaching her to read terrain like a book, to understand how wind and elevation would affect a bullet's trajectory. The first 2 days passed without incident. Sarah performed her assigned duties efficiently, managing supply manifests and coordinating with base logistics. However, she noticed things that others seemed to miss. The way shadows fell across certain rocks in the late afternoon created perfect concealment. How the wind patterns shifted throughout the day, creating updrafts and downdrafts that would challenge any long-range shooter. These observations seemed irrelevant to her supply duties, but her instincts filed them away nonetheless. On the third morning, everything changed. Sarah was conducting her routine inventory check when Specialist Davis burst into their makeshift command post, his radio crackling with urgent chatter. Intelligence had identified confirmed enemy sniper activity in the area. A supply convoy scheduled to pass through the valley that afternoon was now at serious risk, but canceling the mission would disrupt critical medical supply deliveries to forward positions. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez gathered the team for an emergency briefing. The situation was complicated. Air support was unavailable due to weather conditions, and the nearest quick reaction force was hours away. The combat engineers could provide some defensive capability, but they lacked specialized counter-sniper training. The mission was too important to abort, but proceeding without adequate protection seemed like suicide. Sarah listened to the discussion with growing unease. She studied the tactical map, her mind automatically calculating angles and distances. Her father had taught her that every hunting situation was a puzzle, requiring patience, observation, and precise execution. This felt exactly the same, except the prey could shoot back. During a break in the planning session, Sarah approached Staff Sergeant Rodriguez privately. Her suggestion was met with skepticism at first. Support personnel weren't trained for combat roles, especially not precision shooting in hostile territory. But, as she explained her background and demonstrated her knowledge of the terrain they had been observing for 3 days, Rodriguez began to listen more carefully. The truth was, they had few options. The team's designated marksman had been reassigned at the last minute due to a family emergency. Sarah's shooting scores from basic training were impressive, though that had been in controlled conditions rather than combat. Her intimate knowledge of their current position and her observations about local wind patterns gave her advantages that couldn't be quickly replicated. Rodriguez made the decision that would change everything. Sarah would be positioned as overwatch during the convoy's passage, not as primary security but as backup observation. Her role was to watch and report, nothing more. If threats emerged, she was to communicate their positions to base and await instructions. It seemed like a reasonable compromise that utilized her skills without putting undue pressure on her limited combat experience. That afternoon, Sarah climbed to her designated position on the ridge, carrying her M4 rifle and a radio. The weight of responsibility felt heavier than her equipment. Below in the valley, the supply convoy wound its way through the narrow mountain road, precious medical supplies bound for troops who desperately needed them. For the first hour, nothing happened. Sarah maintained her position, scanning the surrounding ridges and rocky outcroppings where enemy snipers might conceal themselves. Her breathing was steady, controlled by years of hunting practice where patience often determined success. The convoy moved slowly but steadily through the valley, making good time despite the difficult terrain. Then she saw it. A brief flash of reflected light from a ridgeline nearly 800 meters away. Sarah focused her attention on the area, using techniques her father had taught her for spotting well-hidden deer. Movement that didn't match natural patterns, shadows that fell wrong, shapes that seemed slightly out of place in the landscape. There, a figure in camouflaged clothing, barely visible among the rocks, setting up what appeared to be a sniper rifle. The position provided an excellent field of fire on the convoy route, and the distance would make return fire from convoy security nearly impossible. Sarah's radio crackled as she prepared to call on the sighting, but she realized with growing horror that the enemy sniper was already taking aim. The convoy below continued its approach, unaware of the threat developing on the opposite ridge. Sarah's training told her to report the contact and wait for instructions, but her instincts screamed that there wasn't time. The enemy sniper would have a clear shot in less than 30 seconds, and the convoy's route provided no immediate cover. In that moment, Sarah faced a decision that would define not just her military career, but her entire understanding of herself. She could follow protocol, make the radio call, and hope that warning the convoy would be enough. Or she could trust her skills, her instincts, and her father's training to take a shot that might save lives. The distance was extreme for her weapon and training level. 800 meters in mountainous terrain with variable wind conditions was a challenge that would test even experienced snipers. But Sarah had made longer shots hunting in Nebraska, and she understood this terrain better than anyone else on the ridge after 3 days of careful observation. She settled into a prone position, feeling the familiar calm that always descended when she was lining up a difficult shot. Her breathing slowed, her heartbeat steadied, and the world narrowed to the simple relationship between her rifle, the target, and the physics that connected them. This was the moment when Sarah Martinez, supply clerk and farm girl from Nebraska, would discover exactly what she was capable of when lives hung in the balance. The enemy sniper was adjusting his position, preparing for his shot at the approaching convoy. Sarah's finger found her trigger, and she began the careful pressure that would send her bullet across nearly half a mile of Afghan mountain air. Everything her father had taught her, every hour of practice, every hunting trip where precision meant the difference between success and failure, had led to this single moment. The shot, when it came, would echo across the valley and change everything. But, for now, Sarah simply breathed, aimed, and Prepared to discover what she was truly made of when the stakes couldn't possibly be higher. The moment stretched like taffy in Sarah's mind. Her finger applied steady pressure to the trigger, feeling the familiar resistance that every marksman knows precedes the moment of truth. 800 meters across the Afghan valley, an enemy sniper was making final adjustments to his own weapon, completely unaware that he had become the hunted rather than the hunter. Sarah's breathing had fallen into the rhythm her father had taught her during those long hunting expeditions in Nebraska. Inhale slowly, exhale halfway, hold, squeeze. The crosswind was minimal at this elevation, but she compensated slightly for the upward angle and the thinner mountain air. Everything she had learned about ballistics and wind resistance during those cold morning hunts was now being applied under the most intense pressure imaginable. The rifle bucked against her shoulder with a sharp crack that echoed across the valley. For a split second, time seemed suspended as the bullet traveled its long arc through the mountain air. Sarah maintained her sight picture, watching through her scope as the distant figure suddenly jerked and fell backward among the rocks. The enemy sniper's weapon tumbled from his position, clattering down the rocky slope before coming to rest in a crevice. Below in the valley, the convoy continued its steady progress, still unaware of the drama that had just unfolded on the ridge above them. Sarah's radio burst to life with concerned voices asking about the gunshot they had heard. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez's voice cut through the chatter, demanding an immediate situation report from all positions. Sarah keyed her radio with shaking hands. Her voice was steadier than she expected when she reported the neutralized threat, providing coordinates and confirming that the convoy route was now clear. The response was immediate and intense. Questions flooded the radio frequency about enemy strength, additional threats, and the circumstances of the engagement. What happened next would become the subject of military legend, though Sarah was too focused on her immediate responsibilities to realize it at the time. The convoy safely completed its passage through the valley, delivering critical medical supplies that would save lives at forward operating bases. But word of the extraordinary shot began spreading through military communication channels almost immediately. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez climbed to Sarah's position within minutes of the engagement, his expression a mixture of relief and amazement. He had brought binoculars and a rangefinder, wanting to verify the distance and circumstances of the shot. When the numbers came back, confirming an 800-meter shot with a standard M4 carbine in mountainous conditions, Rodriguez stared at Sarah with newfound respect. The immediate aftermath was a whirlwind of reports, documentation, and verification procedures. Military protocol required detailed investigation of any engagement, especially one involving a support soldier in a combat role. Sarah found herself explaining her actions repeatedly to different levels of command, each time feeling the weight of what she had accomplished settling more deeply into her consciousness. Captain Williams arrived at Ridge Point Alpha within hours, bringing with him a team of investigators and combat assessors. The enemy sniper's position was thoroughly examined, revealing a sophisticated setup with advanced equipment that confirmed the serious threat he had posed to the convoy. The shot placement was measured and photographed, documenting Sarah's precision under pressure. What struck everyone was not just the accuracy of the shot, but the tactical awareness Sarah had demonstrated. Her positioning, timing, and decision-making under pressure displayed instincts that typically took years to develop in combat veterans. The fact that a supply clerk had demonstrated such capabilities sent ripples through the command structure. Sarah spent the evening writing her after-action report, trying to capture in military language the split-second decision that had changed everything. How could she explain that years of hunting with her father had prepared her for this moment? That reading wind patterns and calculating bullet drop were as natural to her as calculating supply inventory? The rural skills that had once seemed irrelevant to military life had suddenly proven their worth in the most dramatic way possible. The team's dynamic changed overnight. Johnson, the engineer who had joked about Sarah being their secret weapon, now spoke to her with genuine respect. Davis and Thompson began asking detailed questions about her shooting background and tactical observations. Even Rodriguez treated her differently, consulting with her on defensive positions and threat assessment in ways that would have been unimaginable just days earlier. Word of the engagement reached higher command levels with unusual speed. The combination of an impossible shot and the fact that it had been made by a supply clerk created a story that captured imaginations throughout the military hierarchy. By the next morning, Sarah learned that her actions were being reviewed at brigade level. with requests for detailed technical analysis of the engagement. The investigation revealed additional details that made Sarah's accomplishment even more remarkable. The enemy sniper had been a known threat, responsible for several successful attacks on coalition forces. His position had been nearly perfectly concealed, requiring exceptional observation skills to detect. The range and conditions of Sarah's shot pushed the technical limits of her weapon system, yet she had achieved a precise, immediately neutralizing hit. Captain Williams pulled Sarah aside for a private conversation that would prove to be another turning point in her rapidly changing military career. He explained that her actions had not gone unnoticed at the highest levels of command. There were discussions about specialized training, potential reassignment to combat units, and recommendations that could dramatically alter her career trajectory. Sarah listened with mixed emotions. Part of her felt pride in the recognition of her abilities, but another part worried about losing the simple clarity of her support role. She had joined the military seeking stability and education opportunities, not seeking the intense pressure and responsibility of frontline combat operations. Yet her actions on the ridge had revealed capabilities that the military needed and valued. The conversation with Captain Williams also revealed the broader context of her actions. Intelligence reports suggested that the neutralized sniper had been part of a larger network targeting supply lines throughout the region. Sarah's shot had not only protected one convoy but had disrupted enemy operations that threatened the entire logistical network supporting coalition forces in the area. As the days passed, Sarah found herself caught between her old identity and something entirely new. Fellow soldiers who had previously barely acknowledged her existence now sought her opinions on defensive positions and threat assessment. Officers consulted with her about tactical matters that had never been part of her job description. The transformation was both flattering and overwhelming. The technical analysis of Sarah's shot became the subject of detailed military study. Ballistics experts examined every aspect of the engagement, from atmospheric conditions to weapon performance. The consensus was that the shot represented exceptional marksmanship combined with outstanding tactical judgment. Few soldiers with years of specialized training could have achieved the same result under similar conditions. Sarah's background became the subject of intense interest. Military investigators interviewed her family, examining her hunting experience and civilian marksmanship training. Her father, initially confused by the military's sudden attention, proudly described Sarah's development as a shooter and her natural understanding of ballistics and wind reading. The picture that emerged was of someone whose rural background had provided unique preparation for military challenges. The psychological evaluation that followed was equally revealing. Sarah demonstrated remarkable composure under pressure, combined with exceptional spatial reasoning and tactical awareness. Her ability to process complex information rapidly and make sound decisions in high-stress situations marked her as having significant potential for specialized roles within the military structure. Meanwhile, the practical implications of Sarah's actions continued to unfold. Enemy communications intercepted after the engagement revealed significant disruption to their operational planning. The loss of their experienced sniper had forced them to reconsider their tactics for harassing supply convoys, providing breathing room for coalition logistics operations throughout the region. Sarah's original mission on Ridge Point Alpha was scheduled to conclude within the week, but higher command had different plans. Orders came down extending her deployment and temporarily reassigning her to a joint task force focused on counter-sniper operations. The irony was not lost on Sarah that her desire for a simple support role had led to involvement in some of the most dangerous and specialized military operations. The night before her reassignment, Sarah sat alone on the ridge where everything had changed, looking out over the valley where she had taken her life-altering shot. The landscape looked different now, marked by memory and consequence. She thought about the enemy sniper she had killed, wondering about his story and the path that had brought him to that fatal moment on the opposite ridge. She also thought about the convoy personnel whose lives had been saved by her actions. Medical supplies had reached forward positions, potentially saving wounded soldiers who would never know how close they had come to losing those critical resources. The ripple effects of a single moment of decision were almost impossible to calculate. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and responsibilities that Sarah had never sought but could no longer avoid. Her reputation was spreading beyond her immediate unit, creating opportunities and expectations that both excited and intimidated her. The simple clarity of her previous life was gone forever, replaced by complexity and possibility that she was still struggling to understand. As dawn approached over the Afghan mountains, Sarah prepared for the next phase of a journey that had already taken her far from anything she had ever imagined. The shot that had saved a convoy was just the beginning of a story that would test every aspect of her character and capabilities. 3 weeks after the shot that would define her military career, Sarah found herself standing in a briefing room that represented everything she had never expected from her service. The Joint Task Force headquarters buzzed with activity as intelligence analysts, combat planners, and special operations personnel worked to counter the growing sniper threat that had been plaguing coalition forces throughout the region. Colonel James Harrison commanded the counter-sniper task force with the intensity of someone who understood that every day of delay meant more soldiers at risk. His weathered face showed the strain of months spent hunting an enemy that struck without warning and vanished like smoke. When he looked at Sarah during her initial briefing, she saw both skepticism and desperate hope in his eyes. The briefing itself was unlike anything Sarah had experienced in her military career. Detailed intelligence reports described a network of highly trained enemy snipers who had been systematically targeting coalition logistics operations. These weren't opportunistic fighters with basic weapons, but skilled marksmen with advanced equipment and sophisticated tactics that had proven devastatingly effective. Sarah learned that her successful engagement on Ridgepoint Alpha had eliminated one of their most effective operators. Intercepted communications revealed that the enemy network was struggling to replace his expertise, providing a temporary advantage that the task force intended to exploit. However, intelligence also indicated that enemy commanders were adapting their tactics, making future engagements even more challenging. Major Lisa Chun, the task force intelligence officer, presented Sarah with a detailed analysis of regional sniper incidents over the past 6 months. The pattern was sobering. Over 30 coalition casualties from sniper attacks, with successful counter-sniper operations numbering in single digits. The enemy's ability to engage from extreme range and disappear before effective response clearly demonstrated their professional training and intimate knowledge of local terrain. What made Sarah's situation unique was not just her marksmanship ability, but her demonstrated capacity to function effectively under conditions that had challenged far more experienced soldiers. The psychological profile prepared by military analysts highlighted her unusual combination of patience, spatial reasoning, and stress management. These qualities, combined with her rural background and natural shooting ability, created a skill set that was particularly well-suited for counter-sniper operations. The task force's previous approaches had relied heavily on technology and overwhelming firepower. Advanced optics, precision rifle systems, and drone surveillance represented the military's standard response to sniper threats. However, these sophisticated tools had proven insufficient against an enemy that understood both the technology's capabilities and its limitations. What was needed was a different approach that emphasized human skill and tactical innovation. Sarah's integration into the task force began with intensive evaluation and training that pushed her capabilities to their absolute limits. Military instructors with decades of special operations experience put her through scenarios that tested not only her shooting skills, but her ability to read terrain, predict enemy behavior, and make life-or-death decisions under extreme pressure. The training revealed both Sarah's exceptional natural abilities and the gaps in her military education. While her fundamental marksmanship was remarkable, she needed to learn specialized techniques for urban environments, night operations, and coordinated team movements. The instruction was demanding, but Sarah's learning curve impressed even veteran trainers who had worked with elite units. Sergeant First Class Marcus Webb became Sarah's primary mentor during this intensive training period. A decorated sniper with multiple combat tours, Webb initially questioned the decision to fast-track a supply clerk into such specialized operations. However, his skepticism gradually transformed into respect as he observed Sarah's dedication and rapid skill development. Webb's training methods were unforgiving but effective. He created scenarios that simulated the stress and unpredictability of actual combat, forcing Sarah to make split-second decisions while managing multiple variables. Under his guidance, Sarah learned to read enemy patterns, predict likely positions, and coordinate with support elements in ways that maximized mission effectiveness while minimizing risk. The relationship between mentor and student deepened as Webb recognized that Sarah possessed instincts that couldn't be taught through conventional training. Her ability to sense enemy presence and predict their likely actions seemed almost supernatural. But Webb understood that it represented the refined development of hunting skills that had been honed over years of patient practice. During one particularly challenging training exercise, Sarah demonstrated capabilities that surprised even Webb. The scenario involved locating and neutralizing multiple targets in complex terrain while avoiding detection by enemy forces. Sarah's approach was methodical and patient, using natural cover and terrain features in ways that revealed deep understanding of fieldcraft principles. What impressed Webb most was Sarah's ability to think like her targets. Rather than relying solely on technology or overwhelming force, she anticipated enemy movements and positioned herself to exploit their tactical mistakes. This psychological dimension of counter-sniper work represented one of the most difficult aspects to master, yet Sarah seemed to understand it intuitively. The training also revealed the emotional challenges of Sarah's new role. Unlike her previous support duties, counter-sniper operations required her to hunt human beings with lethal intent. The psychological preparation for this responsibility proved as demanding as the technical training, requiring Sarah to develop mental frameworks for dealing with the moral complexity of her new mission. Military psychologists worked with Sarah to ensure that she could handle the stress and moral challenges of her evolving role without compromising her effectiveness or personal well-being. These sessions explored her motivations, fears, and coping mechanisms, helping her develop the psychological resilience necessary for sustained operations in high-stress environments. As Sarah's training progressed, word of her unusual background and rapid development spread throughout the military community. Her story became a source of fascination and inspiration, representing the military's ability to identify and develop talent regardless of its source. However, this attention also created pressure and expectations that added to the stress of her situation. The first operational mission came sooner than anyone expected. Intelligence reports indicated increased enemy sniper activity in a sector where coalition forces were planning a major logistics operation. The timing was critical, and traditional counter-sniper assets were unavailable due to competing priorities elsewhere in the theater. Colonel Harrison made the decision to deploy Sarah's newly formed team, despite concerns about their limited operational experience together. The mission parameters were straightforward but dangerous: locate and neutralize enemy snipers before they could disrupt the upcoming logistics operation. Success would save lives and demonstrate the effectiveness of the task force's new approach. Failure could result in significant casualties and call into question the entire program. Sarah's team consisted of carefully selected personnel who complemented her unique skill set. Webb would serve as her spotter and tactical advisor, while communications specialist Rodriguez would coordinate with supporting elements. Combat engineer Thompson would provide technical support and additional firepower if the situation developed beyond sniper engagement. The mission briefing revealed the sophistication of the enemy they would face. Intelligence indicated at least 2 confirmed sniper teams operating in the area, with possible additional support elements. These weren't amateur fighters, but trained professionals with advanced equipment and intimate knowledge of local terrain. The challenge would be locating them before they could identify and engage Sarah's team. Preparation for the mission was meticulous and thorough. Sarah studied detailed maps and satellite imagery, identifying likely enemy positions and planning multiple approach routes. Her rural hunting background proved invaluable in reading terrain features and predicting how enemy snipers would utilize natural cover and concealment. The night before deployment, Sarah found herself reflecting on the incredible journey that had brought her to this point. Less than 2 months earlier, she had been a supply clerk whose biggest challenge was managing inventory spreadsheets. Now she was preparing to lead a specialized team into combat against some of the enemy's most skilled fighters. The transformation seemed almost surreal, but Sarah understood that it represented more than just a change in military occupation specialty. Her experiences had revealed capabilities and interests that she had never fully recognized in herself. The precision and patience that had made her an effective hunter translated directly to military applications that few could have predicted. As dawn approached, Sarah completed her final preparations for a mission that would test everything she had learned and determine whether her remarkable journey from supply clerk to specialized operator was the beginning of an even more extraordinary military career, or simply a fortunate accident that had reached its natural conclusion. Either way, she was determined to give her absolute best effort and honor the trust that had been placed in her abilities. The morning light filtering through the barracks windows seemed to symbolize the new chapter that was about to begin in Sarah's rapidly evolving story. The pre-dawn darkness felt different as Sarah's team moved through the rugged terrain toward their target area. Unlike her previous mission on Ridge Point Alpha, this operation had been planned with meticulous detail and supported by intelligence that painted a clear picture of the enemy they would face. Yet the uncertainty remained, that fundamental unpredictability that made every combat mission a test of preparation, skill, and luck. Webb moved beside her with the fluid silence that marked his years of special operations experience. His presence provided reassurance, but Sarah understood that leadership of this mission rested on her shoulders. The team had been configured around her unique capabilities, and their success would depend on her ability to outthink and outshoot enemy snipers who had proven themselves against far more experienced coalition forces. The terrain was a sniper's paradise, offering countless positions with excellent fields of fire and multiple escape routes. Rocky outcroppings provided natural cover, while elevation changes created dead spaces that could conceal movement. Sarah found herself constantly evaluating sight lines and wind patterns, her hunting instincts automatically cataloging the advantages and disadvantages of every position they passed. Intelligence had identified two primary areas where enemy snipers were most likely positioned, based on recent incidents and terrain analysis. The first was a ridgeline overlooking the planned convoy route, similar to the position where Sarah had made her famous shot weeks earlier. The second was a more complex area of broken terrain that would allow snipers to engage from multiple positions before relocating. As they approached the first target area, Sarah's team moved with practiced coordination that belied their limited time working together. Webb's experience guided their tactical movement, while Rodriguez maintained communications with supporting elements. Thompson carried additional equipment that might be needed for a prolonged engagement or unexpected complications. The first indication that they were entering hostile territory came from Sarah's own observations rather than any technological warning system. Something about the natural patterns of the landscape seemed slightly wrong, as if human presence had subtly altered the environment. Her father had taught her to trust these instincts while hunting, and the lesson proved equally valuable in combat. Webb confirmed Sarah's suspicions through careful observation of the suspected sniper positions. Faint traces of disturbed earth and vegetation suggested recent human activity in areas that should have been pristine wilderness. The enemy snipers had been careful, but not careful enough to fool experienced hunters who knew what to look for. The approach to the first position required nearly 2 hours of patient movement through terrain that provided minimal cover. Sarah's team had to balance the need for concealment with the requirement to maintain observation of potential enemy positions. Every decision carried the risk of exposure to snipers who might be watching their approach through high-powered optics. When they finally reached a position with clear sight lines to the suspected enemy location, Sarah began the painstaking process of searching for targets that were specifically trained to remain invisible. The enemy snipers had chosen their positions well, utilizing natural cover and artificial camouflage to blend seamlessly with the surrounding environment. It was Webb who spotted the first sign of enemy presence, a brief flash of reflected light from an optical scope that had been carelessly exposed to direct sunlight. The position was approximately 600 meters away, well within Sarah's demonstrated range, but complicated by intervening terrain and variable wind conditions. Sarah studied the target area through her scope, applying lessons learned from countless hunting expeditions where patience and observation were more important than rapid action. Gradually, the enemy position revealed itself through subtle indicators that would have been invisible to less experienced observers. A pattern of shadows that didn't match natural rock formations, vegetation that had been slightly disturbed, and, finally, the outline of a carefully camouflaged rifle barrel. The shot itself represented everything Sarah had learned about marksmanship under pressure. She calculated range, wind compensation, and elevation adjustments while simultaneously monitoring for additional threats that might reveal themselves once firing began. The target was partially concealed, requiring precise placement to ensure immediate neutralization. Webb provided confirmation of range and wind conditions while Rodriguez prepared to coordinate immediate movement after the shot. The team understood that successful engagement would likely trigger response from additional enemy elements, requiring rapid repositioning to avoid counterattack. Sarah's breathing fell into the familiar rhythm that had served her well in hunting and previous combat. The crosshairs settled on the barely visible target as she applied steady pressure to the trigger. The shot, when it came, was precise and immediately effective. The enemy sniper's position was neutralized without opportunity for return fire or communication with supporting elements. However, the engagement also revealed that Sarah's team was facing more sophisticated opposition than intelligence had suggested. Within minutes of her shot, incoming fire from multiple positions indicated that the enemy snipers were operating as a coordinated network rather than independent operators. The tactical situation had suddenly become far more complex and dangerous. Webb immediately recognized the new threat parameters and called for tactical movement to a secondary position that would provide better protection while maintaining observation of the area. Sarah's team found themselves engaged in a deadly game of hide-and-seek with enemy snipers who were demonstrating professional-level tactical coordination. The enemy's response revealed their training and experience. Rather than engaging in direct confrontation, they attempted to pin down Sarah's team while maneuvering for advantageous positions. Their use of terrain and coordinated movement suggested military training rather than the guerrilla tactics typically encountered in the region. Sarah found herself adapting to a completely different type of engagement than her previous experience had prepared her for. Instead of a single shot against an unaware target, she was now involved in a complex tactical situation where every decision carried immediate consequences. The hunting skills that had served her well were now being tested against human prey that was actively hunting her in return. The psychological pressure was intense, but manageable. Sarah's rural background had prepared her for the patience and persistence required for this type of engagement, while her recent training provided the tactical framework needed to coordinate with her team. The combination proved effective as they gradually gained tactical advantage over their sophisticated opponents. Rodriguez's communications equipment proved crucial in coordinating with supporting elements and maintaining situational awareness beyond their immediate area of operations. His reports to higher command provided real-time intelligence about enemy tactics and capabilities that would prove valuable for future operations. As the engagement continued, Sarah demonstrated adaptability that impressed even Webb. She quickly adjusted her tactics to account for the enemy's coordinated response, using terrain features and timing in ways that maximized her team's advantages while minimizing their exposure to counterattack. The second confirmed neutralization came after nearly an hour of careful maneuvering and observation. Sarah identified an enemy sniper who had attempted to flank their position, calculating his movement pattern and positioning herself for an intercept shot that eliminated the threat before it could develop into immediate danger. Thompson's technical expertise proved valuable when the team needed to breach an obstacle that was blocking their movement to a more advantageous position. His engineering background provided solutions that allowed them to maintain tactical momentum while minimizing exposure to remaining enemy elements. The final phase of the engagement tested every aspect of Sarah's development as both marksman and tactical leader. The remaining enemy snipers had adapted to her team's capabilities, forcing her to make increasingly complex calculations that balanced immediate tactical needs against longer-term mission objectives. When the firing finally stopped, Sarah's team had successfully neutralized a coordinated sniper network that had been responsible for multiple coalition casualties. The enemy's sophisticated tactics and equipment confirmed intelligence assessments about their training and capabilities, while also providing valuable information about their operational methods. The after-action review revealed the full scope of what Sarah's team had accomplished. They had faced opposition that represented the enemy's elite sniper capabilities, yet had achieved complete mission success without casualties. The tactical lessons learned would influence counter-sniper operations throughout the theater. Colonel Harrison's personal debrief with Sarah focused not only on the tactical aspects of the mission, but on her development as a leader under extreme pressure. Her ability to adapt to changing circumstances and coordinate effectively with her team had exceeded all expectations, confirming that her rapid promotion from support roles represented genuine capability rather than fortunate accident. The mission's success also attracted attention from higher levels of command, including requests for detailed analysis of Sarah's tactics and training methods. Her unconventional background was generating interest in how rural skills could be better integrated into military training programs, particularly for specialized operations requiring exceptional marksmanship and tactical awareness. As Sarah prepared for the next phase of her rapidly evolving military career, she reflected on how far she had traveled from her original goals of stable employment and education benefits. The quiet supply clerk who had joined the military to escape rural poverty had become a specialized operator whose skills were valued at the highest levels of military command. 6 months after her first shot on Ridgepoint Alpha, Sarah found herself in a situation that would have seemed impossible when she first enlisted as a supply clerk. She stood in a command briefing room at Bagram Airfield, surrounded by senior officers whose ribbons and insignia represented decades of military service and combat experience. The reason for her presence was a question that had echoed through command channels from Afghanistan to the Pentagon. Who took that shot? General Patricia Morrison commanded all coalition special operations in the region, and her reputation for identifying and developing exceptional talent was legendary throughout the military. When she had first heard reports of a supply clerk making an impossible shot under combat conditions, her initial reaction had been skeptical. But as the reports continued to accumulate, describing not just one remarkable engagement, but a series of successful operations, the general's interest had evolved into something approaching amazement. The briefing began with a comprehensive review of Sarah's military record, starting with her unremarkable service as a logistics specialist and tracking her rapid transformation into one of the theater's most effective counter-sniper operators. The statistics were remarkable. 12 confirmed enemy snipers neutralized, 0 coalition casualties during operations under her leadership, and tactical innovations that were being studied for implementation throughout Special Operations Forces. Major Chun presented the intelligence assessment that had prompted this high-level review. Enemy communications intercepted over recent months revealed significant disruption to their sniper networks, with specific references to a coalition operator whose capabilities had forced them to fundamentally alter their tactics. The psychological impact of Sarah's operations was proving as valuable as their immediate tactical results. Colonel Harrison provided the operational perspective, describing how Sarah's unconventional background had led to tactical approaches that consistently surprised enemy forces. Her ability to think like a hunter rather than a conventional soldier had resulted in innovative solutions to problems that had challenged far more experienced operators. The combination of rural instincts and military training was producing results that exceeded theoretical predictions. Webb offered the training assessment, explaining how Sarah's rapid skill development had surpassed anything in his experience working with elite units. Her learning curve in advanced techniques was remarkable, but what truly set her apart was her intuitive understanding of concepts that typically required years to master. The synthesis of hunting experience with military methodology was creating capabilities that couldn't be replicated through conventional training programs. General Morrison listened to these assessments with the focused attention of someone who understood that exceptional talent required exceptional recognition and development. Her questions were probing and specific, designed to determine whether Sarah's successes represented sustainable capability or fortunate circumstances that might not be repeatable under different conditions. When Sarah herself was called to present her perspective, the weight of the moment was almost overwhelming. Standing before general officers whose decisions affected thousands of soldiers, she struggled to explain how her rural background had translated into military success. The skills that had seemed so natural and obvious to her were apparently remarkable to others, requiring her to analyze and articulate processes that had previously been instinctive. Sarah's presentation focused on the hunting principles that had guided her tactical decisions: patience and observation, understanding of terrain and weather effects, and the psychological aspects of predicting prey behavior. She explained how these concepts had translated directly to military applications, providing advantages that complemented rather than replaced conventional military training. General Morrison's questions revealed the broader implications of Sarah's success. Military leadership was increasingly interested in how non-traditional backgrounds might provide solutions to evolving battlefield challenges. The enemy's adaptation to conventional tactics required innovative responses, and Sarah's success suggested that rural skills might provide a previously untapped resource for military effectiveness. The discussion also addressed the systemic challenges of identifying and developing similar talent throughout the military. Sarah's case demonstrated that exceptional capabilities might exist in unexpected places, requiring changes to recruitment, assessment, and training procedures to identify and develop such potential. The traditional military career progression model might need modification to accommodate non-conventional skill sets. As the briefing continued, Sarah realized that her individual story was being considered as a template for broader military transformation. Her success was prompting questions about how the military could better utilize the diverse backgrounds of its personnel, particularly those from rural areas whose skills had been undervalued in an increasingly technological military environment. The culmination of the briefing came when General Morrison addressed Sarah directly about her future career trajectory. The military was prepared to offer opportunities that would have been unimaginable when she first enlisted: specialized training, accelerated promotion, and assignment to elite units whose existence was classified. The recognition was both flattering and intimidating. However, the general's most important question was personal rather than professional. She wanted to understand Sarah's own goals and preferences, recognizing that forcing exceptional talent into inappropriate roles could be counterproductive. The military's needs had to be balanced against individual desires and capabilities to create sustainable career paths. Sarah's response revealed the maturity and perspective that had developed through her extraordinary experiences. While grateful for the opportunities being offered, she understood that her greatest value lay in roles that utilized her unique combination of skills rather than attempting to fit into conventional special operations templates. Her strength was not in becoming like other elite operators, but in providing capabilities that others could not replicate. The discussion of Sarah's future also addressed the broader implications of her success for military recruitment and training. Her story was already being used to attract rural recruits whose backgrounds might provide similar advantages. The military was developing programs specifically designed to identify and develop hunting-based skills that could translate to military applications. General Morrison's final assessment recognized Sarah as representing a new model for military excellence that combined traditional skills with modern military requirements. Her success demonstrated that effective military service was not limited to conventional backgrounds or traditional career paths. The diversity of skills and perspectives that different backgrounds provided was increasingly valuable in complex military environments. The formal recognition of Sarah's achievements came in the form of commendations and promotions that acknowledged not only her individual accomplishments but her contribution to military innovation. However, the most meaningful recognition was General Morrison's personal acknowledgement of how Sarah had challenged assumptions about military potential and effectiveness. As the briefing concluded, Sarah reflected on the incredible journey that had brought her from Nebraska farm girl to the highest levels of military recognition. The skills her father had taught her for hunting rabbits and deer had translated into capabilities that were valued by generals and studied by military analysts. The transformation seemed surreal, but it represented the reality of how individual potential could emerge and develop in unexpected ways. The question that had initiated this high-level review, "Who took that shot?" had been answered definitively. But the broader questions raised by Sarah's success about military talent development, non-traditional skill utilization, and innovative approaches to combat challenges would continue to influence military policy and training for years to come. Sarah's story had become more than individual achievement. It represented a case study in how the military could better recognize and develop the diverse talents of its personnel. Her success challenged conventional wisdom about military effectiveness, while demonstrating that exceptional results could emerge from the most unexpected sources. The general's final words to Sarah emphasized that her greatest contribution might not be her individual achievements, but her demonstration that military excellence could take many forms. Her success had opened doors for others with similar backgrounds while proving that innovation and effectiveness were not limited to traditional military pathways. As Sarah left the briefing room, she understood that her story was far from complete. The recognition and opportunities she had received were beginning points rather than conclusions. The question now was not who had taken that first remarkable shot, but how her unique capabilities could continue to serve the military and protect the lives of fellow soldiers in an increasingly complex and challenging world. The farm girl from Nebraska who had once dreamed of nothing more than stable employment and educational opportunities had become a symbol of untapped potential and innovative excellence. Her journey from supply clerk to elite operator represented not just personal achievement, but a transformation in how the military understood and developed the talents of its diverse personnel. The shot that had started everything was just the beginning of a story that would continue to influence military thinking and practice for decades to come.